In episode 2, the Dodsons head to a church service with Sister Alice. It's the same service that she holds every week that's also broadcast on the radio. Afterwards, they get to meet Sister Alice because she heard of what happened to baby Charlie. One of the guys in this private meeting is Herman Baggerly, and he lets them know that if it's okay with them, they'd like to have the funeral ceremony at the church. The elders have also discussed it, and they're willing to pay for all of the expenses. The meeting is then interrupted by the police who come in and tell the Dodsons that they have a lineup to show them and they have to come down to the station. When they arrive, there is no lineup. And because of this, E.B. is pissed. He's very annoyed that he wasn't warned beforehand that his client was being brought in to be questioned, but Matthew says, "It's fine, I want to help out." And they question him about a suitcase that looks an awful lot like his own suitcase, but it has a bullet hole in it. And Matthew does confirm that, other than the bullet hole, yeah, it looks like his. E.B. asks, "Where did you even get this?" And Ennis tells him that he found it in an abandoned building with 2 other dead bodies. The district attorney then walks in and tells Matthew and E.B. that they think that the 2 dead bodies that were found had something to do with baby Charlie's death. He then asks Dodson if he has a gun, and Matthew can't see what's going on, but E.B. can, and tries to shut it down, getting his client out of there, but they keep on questioning him. The district attorney asks, "Where were you the night that Charlie was taken?" And he says, "I told you guys already, I was at the store." But the problem is they have a patrolman who stopped by the store twice that night and didn't see Matthew. And they also have an eyewitness who is describing seeing Matthew on the side of his own building the night that Charlie went missing. Now, the only thing the cops couldn't figure out is why a grocer's child, and how did he get $100,000? Maybe it has to do with his rich father, but that's inside information, and it's a pretty heavily kept secret, because his father is Herman Baggerly, and that's something that even E.B. didn't know. So the way the cops have it figured out, Matthew got in some really bad gambling debt, so he orchestrated this kidnapping of his own child, where Herman Baggerly would actually pay the $100,000 to get the child back. He then would use that money to pay off his debts, but the kidnapping went horribly wrong, and it ended up in baby Charlie's death. So they arrest Matthew Dodson, and they make a complete scene of it outside of the police station. E.B. then calls a meeting with both Perry Mason and Herman Baggerly and wants to get his side of things. And his side of things are, Herman hooked up with Matthew's mother outside of Missouri, and he wasn't even aware that Matthew existed until a couple years ago when he came into his life. He made Matthew swear that he would become a God-fearing man, and if he did so, he could move out to California and form a life. That included his own business. They had a sort of arrangement. But Herman Baggerly does not believe for a second that his child could be capable of such a horrible, heinous act. But Mason is not so sure, and he's also pissed off about the fact that Herman kept this from them. They never once heard that Matthew Dodson was his child. It was more of Matthew Dodson is just in the same church as me. And Herman shoots back, "Well, you guys kept your service record from me. I looked into you. I found out you were discharged, and not the honorable type. You were Blue Note discharged. And that's usually held for either black people or gay people. And you don't look black to me, so which one is it?" And if Mason was discharged, it might have to do with the fact that during a battle, he ended up shooting his own men. But it was out of compassion. They couldn't move and they were about to get gassed, so he put them out of their misery. But Mason lives with this every day. He kind of has PTSD. So he doesn't take too kindly to this accusation by Herman Baggerly and wants to kick the shit out of him. But instead of doing that, he decides to leave and go follow up on the cop's eyewitness. Before he does that, though, he stops off at the Dodsons and questions Emily. Asks her if she's ever heard of this eyewitness before, her relationship with Matthew, the marriage, and if he could, in fact, be capable of such an act. And she denies everything. She has no idea who this witness is. She doesn't believe that Matthew could do this, and she's getting more and more irritated to the point where she finally says, "Mr. Mason, if you want to keep questioning me like this, you can go out with the other reporters." But instead of doing so, he decides to go across the street and question her neighbor. Now, Emily's story has always been that she fell asleep by the radio, and she's sticking to that. But the neighbor lets him know that Emily's really lonely. In her opinion, Matthew works too much. And you can tell that she's lonely because she's constantly on the phone. And that included the night that Charlie went missing. And Mason can't believe this because her story has always been that she fell asleep. But the neighbor says, "No, look, she's on the phone right now." And sure enough, there's Emily in the window calling somebody. Now, that same day, the cops had mentioned that 2 stiffs were found in an abandoned building. And they were found by a cop named Officer Drake. Officer Drake was alerted to the dead bodies by a resident, and he followed the blood trail up into the roof, but that's where it stopped. When he looked down in the alley, the body of the guy who fell is gone. So he puts all of this in his police report, but detectives Holcomb and Ennis question it. They start picking it apart, asking, well, maybe it could have came from the roof down and not from the building up. And Drake respectively says, yeah, maybe, but the blood trail was in fact heading up. They start then mocking him about the fact that he'll never be a detective because he's black. And it forces him to have to change his report even though he knows that that's the wrong thing to do. He doesn't really have a choice. The next day, Emily has to go casket shopping, but she's not in the right mind to do so. So she wants to go get food and ends up heading there with Della after getting accosted by a bunch of reporters outside of the funeral parlor. And she's not really touching her food because she's just in a very, very fragile state. At one point, she excuses herself and gets up to use the payphone. And as soon as she finishes up, who sneaks in there? Perry Mason, who was following her. But he's not that slick because Della saw him go into the phone booth. Before Della can question him, he is able to find out the number that she just called and calls up the person who handles his messages to reverse look up whose number that is and their address. He then gets chastised by Della for following him, but he says, look, I'm just doing my job. So with the address, Mason that night heads to this person's home. And what he finds is a dead body. And it's the dead body of the guy who jumped from rooftop to rooftop but missed and fell into the alleyway. Although it's made to look like he blew his brains out with a shotgun. He even left a suicide note saying, I can't live with what I've done and you can find the others at this address. And the address is obviously that abandoned building that Ennis shot up. Mason also notices that the guy had some fake teeth, and that will come into play later. He snoops around the house some more and sees that the guy burned a bunch of money, and then he sees a stuffed baby alligator. And when he flips it over, he sees a tag for an alligator farm. And this alligator farm just so happened to sell stuffed baby turtles as well, and one of those turtles happened to be in baby Charlie's room. And at the time, Mason didn't think anything of it, but this seems like too much of a coincidence. He also notices that in that alligator are love notes written from Emily to this guy. So as soon as he's done there, he takes the love notes and heads over to Emily Dotson's place to question her about it. He accuses her of the infidelity, and at first she denies it, but after he shows her the letters, she can't deny it anymore. He then tells her that he's dead, and that's when she really breaks down, because her baby's dead, her lover's dead, and her husband's arrested for the murder. The next day, Perry heads to EB's office with the notes to show that they can get Matthew off. But Perry and Della are at odds. Perry thinks that this proves that Emily did it. And Della, having spent the day with her, doesn't think there's a chance in hell that she did it. Now, another guy in that meeting is Pete, who has been rehired by Perry, even though EB can't stand him. He thinks he's a degenerate, and even says as much. But Pete is really good at his job, and he's found 2 eyewitnesses that were in the gambling ring that also had Matthew Dotson in it the night that baby Charlie went missing, and they could be their alibi. Now, Mason's whole thing is we're here to defend Baggerly and his son, not his daughter-in-law. And while this might be embarrassing because his son was cheated on, it's going to get him off of murder. So the way that Mason has it figured out, it was Emily Dotson's lover who took baby Charlie that night. But Pete jumps in and says, wait, I thought you just said that Emily's lover was distracting her on the phone. How could he be in 2 places at once? And that's where Mason's story starts coming apart. EB says you can't just pull this stuff out of your ass. It's not going to work. But EB is so hung up on these letters that he grabbed from the scene of the crime. And the problem is, it's going to be really tough to get them into evidence. And that's where EB's having trouble. How do I submit these? How did I even come about these? It's not like I can replant them at the scene. The scene is now crawling with cops because I had to call it in. EB then asks both Perry and Della, we got to look at what we got. Matthew is a gambler. Emily is a cheat. But do you think either of them did this? Della firmly says no, but Mason says, I don't know, not intentionally. EB then throws down the letters on the table and says the letters will stay here until I can figure out how to submit these into evidence. Now, that day is also the same day as baby Charlie's funeral ceremony, and they're going to hold it at the church. Although not everybody is thrilled about that. While doing the seating arrangements, because this event has some pretty heavy hitters at it, one of the members brought up that it might not be the best idea to hold this event at the temple. Because yes, while it's a tragedy of what happened to baby Charlie and he is part of the parish, you also have to look at it like one of the members of the parish is being charged for that murder. So do they want the unwanted attention? But Herman Baggerly, who was in that meeting, stood up for his son, saying there's no way he could have done it. He's a God-fearing man just like you. So the event goes on, and people in attendance includes some cops, the DA, Perry, EB, Della, and even Clark Gable makes an appearance. And when Sister Alice gets up there, she gives an impassioned speech, riling up the crowd, saying that she hopes the cops give justice to whomever did this. After the ceremony, the group starts making their way over to the hearse, as Emily is accompanied by Sister Alice, but then she's suddenly arrested by the police for the exact same crime that Matthew was arrested for. This causes quite a big scene, but in the middle of it, Detective Holcomb looks back at Perry and gives him a hat tip, because Perry, along with EB, decided that it was best for their client to give the information to the police about Emily to try to get Matthew off. So instead of heading in the hearse, she's heading in the paddy wagon. Afterwards, EB and Perry head to this affluent kind of boys club that EB had met the district attorney in earlier in the episode, but Perry doesn't want to be there. He doesn't feel good about what he did, and the one thing that's sticking with him is what Della said. Infidelity is not murder. EB tries to make him feel better, saying that the charges against Emily are never going to stick anyway. I mean, she's a God-fearing housewife. So they were able to get their client off, and the charges against his wife aren't going to stick anyway, so it's a win-win for everybody. And EB is able to stick in the nose of the district attorney, whom he has a rivalry with, even though they're completely two-faced to each other. The other thing that Mason is hung up on is the piece of thread that he pulled from baby Charlie. He's been carrying it around and kind of playing with the matchbox that he's kept it in. He asks EB, do you have any idea how many pieces of thread are in this town? But EB says, I'm sure you'll get to the bottom of it. And Perry knows because he headed to a place to try to find out where this thread came from, but he found out there's a ton of thread in the town. And it's not going to be easy at all to track down where this particular piece of thread came from. EB then leaves to go schmooze with the district attorney and some other people, and Mason just leaves disgusted. Now, while Mason and EB were discussing the case, Officer Drake was patrolling his route, and with some downtime, he decided to head to the alleyway, where he's poking around and he finds the remnants of false teeth, and they look an awful lot like the same false teeth that were in the guy's head who, quote, blew his brains out. Thank you for watching this recap. If you do not see the next one up in the corner right there on the end screen, don't worry, it'll be up shortly. Please consider following the channel. That'd be cool. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you don't, there's a thumbs down button for a reason.